The Nuremberg Trials represents a landmark in history, standing high for being the epitome of justice and accountability following the Second World War. These trials, which went from 1945 into 1946, were extremely unique in the records of world history, as international courts sought to try individuals for crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes. These trials took place in the city of Nuremberg, Germany, a quite symbolic location, taking into consideration its importance for the Nazi regime. The reason thus becomes clear for having the venue here. The Allies wished to take this particular place where evil was hugely concentrated and convert it as a symbol of justice with moral accounting. Trials concerning such scope and grand dimensions were held in Nuremberg for the first time. For whole year, leading figures in the Nazi regime were tried. It was not only the punishment meted on the guilty, but also a landmark that would deter such heinousness from occurring in the near future. In a regular criminal trial, guilt had to be established among these defendants. More importantly, trials created a precedent under international criminal law when certain crimes were said to be committed, even under a veneer of governmental authority. World War II wreaked destruction on the world, never seen before, culminating in the Holocaust, the systemic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims, including Roma, those with disabilities, political dissidents, and many others targeted by the Nazi regime. It had left most of Europe in ruin, took the lives of several million people, and dislocated innumerable families. It was a holocaust so grand that the Allied powers then had to go to great lengths to ensure that justice prevailed. In Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam laid down plans for post war machinery on war crime trials. In so doing, they laid the bedrock upon which what has been dubbed the Nuremberg Trials would take place. It was decided that an international tribunal for the major war criminals representative of the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and France be convened. There was a reason behind why Nuremberg had been chosen as a trial site. It hosted Nazi rallies, and this time it would host a fight for justice. The Nuremberg trials were an introduction of a single concept saliently new: the individual accountability for acting on behalf of state authority. It had been a conceptual change towards the international law. It said something: crimes against humanity never went unpunished. In these two phases came major trials, the International Military Tribunal, and then came afterwards a series of Nuremberg military tribunals concerning with different segments of Nazi regime.
In light of such unparalleled destruction and exposure of the Holocaust, extraordinary measures were being called for by the Allied powers in the post war scenario. The conferences at Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam indicated the seriousness of the commitment of the powers toward an equitable solution. Choosing Nuremberg as the venue of the trial was both one of expedient happenstance and profoundly symbolic of the transformation of a hub of Nazi ideology into a beacon of justice. Holding individuals responsible for their crimes, the Nuremberg trials pioneered that new principle that state authority does not cloak one from justice, which has formed the basis of international criminal law and lies at the heart of our commitment to human rights today. It was a truly collaborative process, with each ally bringing its own unique legal tradition and insight to the table. It was a collective effort and an extremely important role played in laying down jurisprudence that was fair and broad based. In remembering the Nuremberg trials, we are reminded of the importance of vigilance and the continued responsibility of nations to guard and advance human dignity. These lessons resound today, inspiring a continued pursuit of justice and accountability in the face of new challenges. These trials really laid the groundwork for future international legal mechanisms such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Geneva Conventions, which crystallized the principles developed in the Nuremberg processes.
Indeed, the very heart of the Nuremberg trials was to prosecute those mainstays of the Nazi regime that had been responsible for perpetrating some of the most dastardly crimes ever known in history. Hermann Goering, the former second in command of the Third Reich, was charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. Being the chief of Luftwaffe, he was one of the closest designers of the oppressive policy of the Nazi state. He was sentenced to death, though he had risen in its defense and committed suicide before execution. Another important figure tried at Nuremberg was Rudolf Hess, Adolf Hitler's deputy. He had made that strange flight to Scotland back in 1941 to negotiate peace with the United Kingdom, and because of this action was thrown into jail. At Nuremberg, he was indicted on counts of crimes against peace and conspiracy to commit crimes against humanity. Hess was sentenced to life imprisonment to be served in Spandau prison, where he stayed until his death. It avenged the victims of that brutality and at that same time gave a message to other criminals who may try committing the same crime in some future time. These documented and publicized trials brought every individual crime of the Nazi regime out into the open light of day. This openness will be very quintessential as a means of enlightening future generations regarding the aberration of totalitarianism and the importance of upholding the rights of all people.
The Allied nations, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and France all united into one in their vision of justice for post-World War II. Each nation brought to the table its legal expertise and moral resolve in ensuring a non-biased and just process. The United States took center stage in laying down the legal framework under the guidance of Chief Prosecutor Robert H. Jackson. Jackson's opening statement framed the trials in terms of moral obligation to try these people. This was in the form of legal support and staff that came from the United Kingdom, headed by Chief British Prosecutor Sir Hartley Shawcross. His speeches were eloquent and to the point, speaking volumes of the atrocities committed and how these criminals needed to be brought to the book. The exposition of the most heinous Nazi atrocities on Soviet territory was underlined by the Soviet Union through Chief Prosecutor Roman Rudenko. The involvement of Rudenko underlined the common will of the Allied powers in the pursuit of justice. France was for swift and harsh punishment, and it was represented by the chief prosecutors François de Menthon. French prosecution underlined the atrocities committed against the citizens of France and showed the general effects of Nazi crimes. These countries supported the principle of collective responsibility together and gave a globally recognized standard in justice and human rights. This was an unprecedented coalition showing the determination of the world community to bring to book perpetrators of inhuman crimes. Well, the Nuremberg trials stood up for something that could be realized as a result of international cooperation. The legal frameworks, together with the procedural innovations devised therein, have influenced subsequent international tribunals, the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, and the International Criminal Court. It is the principle elaborated in Nuremberg that remains one of the bases of our contemporary efforts to cope with crime against humanities. The Nuremberg trials set a standard in world history in that a sense of individual responsibility, irrespective of rank or position, toward crimes committed against humanity had been established. This served as a forerunner for future international tribunals to draw upon and laid the foundation for modern human rights law. This gives a lesson learned from the legacy of Nuremberg insofar as justice and accountability will not be abandoned, the one collective responsibility of nations regarding upholding the rule of law. That is the legacy of the Nuremberg trials. Prosecutions for war crimes and crimes against humanity go on in the world today, just as in the time the trials were being conducted. Principles of justice and accountability emanating from the Nuremberg trials remain remarkably pertinent today in guiding international responses to mass atrocities and genocide. It reminds us to be vigilant in defense of human rights and bringing atrocious offenders to justice. The lessons learned from Nuremberg as we dive into the future hope for a world of righteousness where both dignity and rights are guaranteed to everyone. The trials represent the unwavering commitment and the international community to go against impunity and make sure that the terrors of the past are never repeated. However, human dignity, protection, and promotion fall on us as a shared responsibility. Therefore, let us take it up from here.